She hadn't expected to find a child in the ruins of the old cathedral, but there he was, pale as moonlight and trembling beneath the shattered remnants of a stained glass window. Rain hammered against the broken stones around them, turning the ancient floor into a mirror of reflected lightning. Maya pulled her jacket tighter and approached slowly, her boots crunching on centuries of debris. The boy couldn't have been more than 7, with hair so blonde it seemed silver in the storm light, and eyes that tracked her movement with an intensity no child should possess. She was soaked through and exhausted after 3 days of running from everything she'd once called home, but something in her chest lurched at the sight of him alone in this forsaken place. She crouched down, keeping her voice soft despite the thunder rolling overhead. "Hey there. Are you okay? Are you lost?" The boy's lips parted, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too white. He didn't answer, just stared at her with those unblinking eyes that reflected the lightning like mirrors. Maya's instincts screamed at her to run, the same instincts that had kept her alive when her stepfather's men had come for her 3 nights ago, but she couldn't abandon a child. Not even one who looked at her like she was something to be studied rather than someone offering help. She reached out her hand, palm up, non-threatening. "I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. We need to get you somewhere dry and safe." The boy tilted his head, a movement that was somehow both innocent and deeply unsettling. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an accent she couldn't place, something old and formal that didn't belong in a child's mouth. "You should not have come here. He will find you now." Maya's hand froze in midair. "Who will find me?" But even as she asked, she felt it. A pressure in the air, a weight that hadn't been there moments before. The temperature dropped so suddenly that her breath misted before her face, and the rain seemed to slow, each droplet hanging suspended for a heartbeat too long. The shadows at the far end of the cathedral shifted, gathered, coalesced into something solid. Into someone. He emerged from the darkness, as if he had been born from it, tall and broad-shouldered in a coat that swept the ground behind him. His features were sharp enough to cut, cheekbones and jawline carved by some merciless sculptor, who had forgotten that beauty should contain warmth. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and his eyes, when they found hers across the ruined nave, were the deep crimson of old blood. Maya's heart stopped. Actually stopped. She felt it cease its rhythm in her chest before lurching back to life with a painful thud. Every cell in her body recognized what stood before her even though her mind refused to accept it. Vampire. The word echoed through her thoughts like a death knell. Not the sanitized version from movies and romance novels, but the real thing, the ancient predator that humans had feared since the first of them crawled from the primordial dark. The vampire's gaze swept over her, clinical and assessing, before settling on the boy. When he spoke, his voice was low and resonant, carrying easily through the storm. "Sebastian. You know better than to wander." The child, Sebastian, rose from his crouch with fluid grace and moved toward the vampire without hesitation. "I was curious about her. She smells different, father." Maya's legs trembled with the urge to run, but she remained frozen, trapped by those crimson eyes that had returned to study her with renewed interest. The vampire rested one elegant hand on his son's shoulder, and Maya watched as his nostrils flared, as something shifted in his expression that she couldn't identify. "Yes. She does." He moved toward her, each step deliberate and unhurried, a predator who had no need to rush because his prey had nowhere to flee. Maya forced herself to stand, to meet his approach with what little dignity she could muster when her entire body shook with fear. She had survived her stepfather's abuse. She had survived the revelation that he'd been selling information about her to someone, something she still didn't understand. She had survived 3 days of running through forests and abandoned buildings with nothing but the clothes on her back. She would not cower now. The vampire stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest, the complete absence of breath. Close enough that she could smell something dark and ancient beneath the rain, like old libraries and winter nights and the copper tang of blood. You are the one Victor Ashworth has been hunting, the vampire said. It wasn't a question. Maya's blood turned to ice at the mention of her stepfather's name. How do you know that? Because Victor Ashworth has been hunting you on my behalf. Though I confess, he never mentioned what you truly are. Those crimson eyes traced over her face, down her throat, lingering on the pulse that hammered visibly beneath her skin. Tell me, little human, do you know why your blood sings to me like nothing I have encountered in 4 centuries? Maya couldn't speak. Couldn't move. The vampire's presence was overwhelming, a gravitational force that pressed against her senses and demanded submission. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something that recognized him in a way that made no sense, that responded to his proximity with a warmth that spread through her chest despite the cold. The vampire's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Interesting. You feel it as well. He raised one hand, and she flinched, but he merely brushed a strand of wet hair from her face, his touch cold as ice and impossibly gentle. My name is Aldrich Vane. I am king of the northern courts, and you, Maya Ashworth, are something that should not exist. Sebastian tugged at his father's coat. Can we keep her? Under any other circumstances, Maya might have laughed at the absurdity of a child asking to keep a human like a stray cat. But Aldrich's expression remained serious, contemplative, as if he were actually considering the question. That depends entirely on her, Aldrich said. On whether she wishes to understand what she is, or whether she prefers to continue running until Victor's mercenaries catch her. The mention of her stepfather's men broke through Maya's paralysis. What do you mean, what I am? I'm human. I'm just a normal person, who made the mistake of being born to the wrong family. Aldrich's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if it contained any warmth. You are many things, Maya, but normal is not among them. The bloodline that runs through your veins is one I have been searching for across 3 centuries. The last of the old blood, the humans who once served as consorts to vampire royalty, whose blood carried properties that made them precious beyond measure. He stepped closer, and Maya's back met the cold stone of a pillar. She had nowhere to retreat, no escape from the intensity of his gaze. Your mother was the last known carrier. When she died, I assumed the line had ended. Victor Ashworth was supposed to be watching for any signs that it had continued through you. Instead, he chose to exploit your heritage for his own gain, selling your blood to the highest bidder. Maya's world tilted. Her mother had died when she was 12, leaving her with nothing but a locket and a warning to never let anyone take her blood. She had assumed it was the paranoia of a sick woman, the delusions of someone dying too young. But the medical tests her stepfather had insisted upon. The weekly blood draws he'd claimed were for monitoring her health. He was selling my blood, Maya whispered. 4 years, he was selling it, and I never knew to those desperate enough to pay his exorbitant prices. Yes. Old blood has properties that vampires crave, healing abilities that can mend wounds beyond our natural regeneration, euphoric effects that some find addictive. Aldrich's expression hardened. Victor Ashworth has been running a black market operation under my very nose, using a resource that by ancient law belongs to the crown. When I discovered his betrayal and demanded he bring you to me, he chose to run, and to send his men to retrieve you by force rather than face my judgment. Sebastian had settled onto a fallen column, watching the exchange with curious eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Maya realized with a start that the child was likely older than he appeared, perhaps decades or centuries old despite his small form. What happens now? She asked, hating the tremor in her voice. You're going to take me. Use me like he did. Aldrich's brow furrowed, and for a moment, something almost like offense flickered across his features. I am not Victor Ashworth. I do not take without consent, regardless of what old laws might permit. The relationship between old blood and the crown was always meant to be one of mutual benefit, of protection offered in exchange for the gift of blood freely given. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, an echo of the gesture she had offered Sebastian minutes ago. I am offering you sanctuary, Maya. A place in my household where Victor cannot reach you, where you will be protected and provided for. In return, I ask only that you allow me to study your bloodline, to understand what you are capable of. Nothing will be taken from you without your explicit permission. Thunder rolled overhead, and rain continued to pour through the shattered ceiling, but Maya barely noticed. She stared at Aldrich's outstretched hand, at the promise it represented, and felt the weight of the choice before her. Trust a vampire king, a creature of legend and nightmare, or continue running until her stepfather's men inevitably caught her. Put her fate in the hands of another powerful man, or face certain capture and worse. But there was something else, something she couldn't explain. A pull toward Aldrich that had nothing to do with logic, a recognition that hummed in her blood whenever he drew near. The same warmth that had sparked when he first looked at her, growing stronger with each moment they remained close. Sebastian hopped down from his perch and approached her, taking her hand in his small, cold one. You should come with us. Father keeps his promises. And the castle has a library that goes on forever. Maya looked down at the strange child, then up at the ancient vampire, who watched her with those unsettling crimson eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. She placed her hand in Aldrich's. His fingers closed around hers, ice-cold and gentle, and something shifted in the air between them, a connection that snapped into place like a key turning in a lock. Aldrich's eyes widened, his composure cracking for the first time since he'd appeared. Impossible, he breathed. The bond, I have not felt it stirring since my queen died 2 centuries ago. Maya tried to pull her hand back, suddenly afraid of what she had agreed to without understanding. But Aldrich held firm, not painfully, but unrelentingly. What bond? What are you talking about? His gaze met hers, and she saw something new in those crimson depths. Not predatory hunger, not clinical assessment, but something that looked almost like wonder. Old blood does not merely sustain vampires, Maya. In rare cases, extraordinarily rare cases, it calls to us. Creates a connection between vampire and human that transcends the physical. Sebastian clapped his hands together, his young face bright with delight. She is your mate. Just like Mother was. I knew she smelled special. The word hit Maya like a physical blow. Mate? She had run from one cage only to stumble into another, bound by blood and ancient magic to a vampire king she had known for mere minutes. No, she said, shaking her head. No, I didn't agree to this. I just wanted protection. I didn't sign up to be your anything. Aldrich released her hand, and the sudden absence of his touch left her feeling strangely bereft. The bond can be resisted, if you wish. It is not a compulsion, merely a potential. What develops between us, if anything develops, will be entirely of your choosing. He stepped back, giving her space, and the gesture did more to ease her fear than any words could have. For now, I offer you exactly what I promised. Sanctuary. Protection. A chance to understand your heritage. Nothing more will be asked or expected of you. Maya's racing heart began to slow. She looked at this ancient creature, who could have simply taken her, who had the power to force her compliance in 100 different ways, and saw only patience in his expression. Why, she asked. Why give me any choice at all? You're a vampire king. I'm nobody. Aldrich's expression softened in a way that made him look almost human. My first queen taught me that power means nothing without consent. That true strength lies not in what we can take, but in what is freely given. I have lived by that principle for 200 years, and I will not abandon it now, not even for the last daughter of the old blood. Sebastian tugged at Maya's sleeve. Also, he gets very lonely. All the court ladies are boring, and they only want to talk about politics. A sound escaped Aldrich that might have been a laugh if it weren't so rusty, so clearly unpracticed. My son lacks discretion, he said dryly. But he is not entirely wrong. Come. We should leave before Victor's men track you here. We can continue this conversation somewhere warmer and considerably less damp. He turned and began walking toward the shadows from which he'd emerged, Sebastian scampering ahead, with the enthusiasm of a child who had forgotten he was supposed to be otherworldly and frightening. Maya hesitated for only a moment before following. The journey to Aldrich's domain was unlike anything Maya had experienced. One moment they stood in the ruined cathedral, and the next, shadows wrapped around them like living things, cold and dark and somehow safe. When the darkness parted, she found herself standing in a grand entrance hall lit by hundreds of candles, their flames steady despite no visible source of warmth. The Shadow Walk, Aldrich explained, noting her disorientation. A gift of ancient vampire lords. You will grow accustomed to it. Maya doubled over, fighting nausea, and felt a cool hand steady her shoulder. She looked up to find Aldrich watching her with concern that seemed genuine. Or perhaps not immediately. Sebastian, fetch water for our guest. As the boy darted off, Maya straightened and took in her surroundings. The hall was enormous, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into darkness, and walls lined with tapestries depicting scenes she couldn't quite pass. Everything spoke of age and power and wealth beyond measure. This is your home? She asked. One of them. The Northern Court maintains several residences, but this is where I spend most of my time. It is also the most heavily warded against intrusion. Aldrich guided her toward a doorway, his hand hovering near her back without quite touching. You should rest. Tomorrow, we can discuss your situation in detail. Tonight, you are safe. The word wrapped around Maya like a blanket, easing tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying for days. Years, perhaps. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt truly safe. Sebastian returned with a crystal glass of water, and Maya drank gratefully, the cold liquid soothing her parched throat. The boy watched her with those ancient eyes, and she found herself wondering what his story was, how a vampire child came to exist when vampires were supposedly immortal and unchanging. I will have a room prepared for you, Aldrich said. Is there anything you require tonight? Food, clothing, company. Maya shook her head. Just sleep. I've barely slept in 3 days. Something flickered in Aldrich's expression, anger that she sensed was not directed at her. Victor's men pursued you without rest. They are relentless. Professional. They almost caught me twice. She wrapped her arms around herself, remembering the terror of those near misses. I don't understand why he's so desperate to get me back. If he was just selling my blood, couldn't he find another source? Aldrich exchanged a look with Sebastian that she couldn't interpret. There is no other source. You are the last of your line. And your blood is worth more than gold to certain parties who would not be pleased to learn that Victor has lost his supply. The implication settled over Maya like a shroud. Her stepfather wasn't just chasing her for his own benefit. He was being pressured by dangerous clients, vampires or worse, who would do anything to reclaim their drug of choice. How long until they find me here? They will not. Aldrich's voice carried absolute certainty. This domain is protected by magic older than Victor's entire family line. You are safe here, Maya. I give you my word, and despite everything, despite every instinct that screamed at her not to trust a vampire, not to trust any man who held power over her, Maya believed him. The room they gave her was larger than her entire apartment had been, with a bed draped in velvet and silk that looked like something from a fairy tale. Maya stood in the center of the space, still dripping rainwater onto the ancient carpet, and felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time since she'd fled her home. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find a woman with dark skin and kind eyes, holding a stack of clothing and towels. His Majesty thought you might want something dry to sleep in, the woman said, her voice warm despite the late hour. I'm Thea. I'll be your lady's maid while you stay with us, if that's agreeable. Maya took the clothing with numb fingers. I've never had a lady's maid, Then I'll try not to be too overwhelming, Thea smiled. The bathroom is through that door. Hot water is always available, and there are clean toiletries laid out. Is there anything else you need? Just answers. But I suppose those will have to wait until morning. Thea's expression softened with understanding. His Majesty is not what most humans expect from vampire royalty. Give him a chance, and you may find he surprises you. She slipped away, leaving Maya alone with her thoughts and a growing sense that her world had shifted on its axis in ways she was only beginning to understand. She bathed in water that stayed impossibly hot, washing away days of dirt and fear and exhaustion. The clothing Thea had provided was soft as clouds against her skin, and when she finally crawled into the massive bed, sleep took her almost instantly. She dreamed of crimson eyes and cold hands and a voice that promised safety in the dark. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through heavy curtains, and a knock at her door that was almost apologetic in its softness. Maya surfaced from the deepest sleep she'd had in months, disoriented and unsure where she was until memory came flooding back. Vampire. King. Mate. She dressed quickly in another outfit that had appeared while she slept, simple but finely made, and opened the door to find Sebastian waiting in the hall. Father says breakfast is ready, and you must be hungry because humans eat all the time. Maya found herself smiling despite everything. You're not wrong. Lead the way. The dining room was sunlit and surprisingly normal, with a long table set for three. Aldrich stood by the window, silhouetted against the morning light in a way that made him look almost human. Almost. I trust you slept well, he said as she entered. Better than I have in years. Which is strange, considering I'm in a vampire's castle. Aldrich's lips twitched. I have been told I have a calming effect. Though usually not by humans who have recently discovered my existence. Breakfast was an unexpectedly comfortable affair. Sebastian chatted about his studies and his collection of preserved insects, while Aldrich listened with the patient attention of a father who had heard the same stories 1,000 times, but never tired of them. Maya ate more than she had in days, her appetite returning with the sense of safety that permeated the castle. When the meal was finished, Aldrich dismissed Sebastian to his lessons and turned to Maya with a more serious expression. We should discuss your situation. There are things you need to understand about what you are, and what it means for your future. I'm listening. The old blood is not merely a genetic quirk. It is a gift, passed down from humans who formed sacred bonds with the first vampires millennia ago. Those humans were healers, advisors, consorts, partners in every sense. Their blood carried properties that helped vampires maintain their humanity, kept them from descending into the mindless hunger that claims so many of our kind. Aldrich moved to sit across from her, his posture uncharacteristically open. When the old bloodlines died out, we lost more than a source of power. We lost our connection to humanity. Many vampires became the monsters your stories describe, and those of us who fought to remain civilized grew harder, colder, more distant from the world. Maya processed this slowly. So I'm, what, the key to keeping vampires from going crazy? In crude terms, yes. But you are also something more. The bond that stirred between us yesterday, it is not merely a useful tool. It is a sacred connection, one that has not manifested for centuries. I will not pretend to understand why it chose us, but I will not ignore its significance. He leaned forward, and Maya found herself unable to look away from the intensity in his gaze. I am not asking you to accept me as a mate. That would be presumptuous beyond measure. I am asking you to stay, to learn about your heritage, to give both of us time to understand what this connection means. Whatever develops, if anything develops, will be your choice entirely. The words should have frightened her. A vampire king, ancient and powerful beyond comprehension, speaking of fate and sacred bonds and connections that transcended understanding. But Maya felt only the warmth that had been building since they first touched, the inexplicable sense that she had found something she hadn't known she was missing. What about my stepfather? He won't stop looking for me. Victor Ashworth will be dealt with. He has committed crimes against the Crown, trafficking in old blood without permission, operating in my territory without acknowledgement. When I find him, and I will find him, he will face vampire justice. The cold certainty in Aldrich's voice should have been terrifying. Instead, Maya felt only relief. Then I'll stay, she said. I'll learn about what I am. And we'll see what happens with this bond. Aldrich's expression softened in a way that transformed his severe features, made him look almost vulnerable. Thank you. I know this cannot be easy, trusting someone like me after what you have endured. You're right. It isn't easy. Maya met his gaze steadily. But you've given me more choice in the last 12 hours than I've had in my entire life. That counts for something. Sebastian burst back into the room, apparently having abandoned his lessons in favor of eavesdropping. Does this mean she's staying? Can I show her the library? Can I show her the dungeon? We don't use it anymore, but it's very atmospheric. Aldrich sighed with the long-suffering patience of a parent. Yes, she is staying. You may show her the library. You may not show her the dungeon until she has had at least a week to adjust. Maya laughed, the sound surprising her. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. Sebastian grabbed her hand and began tugging her toward the door. The library first. You won't believe how many books there are. Father has been collecting them for centuries and he's read them all, which is very boring, but I like the ones with pictures. As she allowed herself to be led away, Maya glanced back at Aldrich. He stood in the sunlight, watching her go with an expression that contained more emotion than she would have thought possible for a creature of the night. Something in her chest resonated in response, a warmth that felt like the beginning of something vast and transformative. She had come to the ruined cathedral seeking shelter from the storm. She had found instead a pale boy, a vampire king, and a destiny she was only beginning to understand. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers she couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in her life, Maya felt like she might finally be exactly where she was meant to be.